I'm delighted to be here. Thank you, Tracy, for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be here, whatever we mean by here these days in these very strange times. My one regret, obviously, is that I'm not able to be there with you in person. I've heard a lot about Nelson. I know it's a very beautiful and quite special place, and I was very much looking forward to visiting, but that'll have to wait for another time. And congratulations to the library on its 100th anniversary, which is quite a milestone. And thank you to the library, and thank you to Heather Goldick and Anne DeGrace for inviting me to speak this evening. It's really a pleasure to be here to talk about one of my favorite institutions, the library. And you know, while I was working on this talk, I was thinking back on some of my own experiences with the library as a beloved part of my life and my community. My early memories of the library were of the Don Mills Public Library in Don Mills, Ontario, in the subdivision that I grew up in. It was one of those classic modernist buildings from the early 60s. My mom and I would go, I remember. She would stay at the adult section on the upstairs, and I would go downstairs to the children's section, which I can still picture that flight of stairs in my mind's eye because it was a floating staircase, just like the Brady Bunch had in their house. So that really stuck with me. And of course, I remember, as maybe you all do, graduating to the adult section. If you're like me and around my age, you probably have a lot of really physical, tactile memories of the library. The smell of the index cards in those skinny drawers, the feel of opening up a new hardback with the plastic coating, and the specific technologies of the library, the Dewey Decimal System, the borrower's card and the stamp that told you when the book was due, the newspapers hanging over a dowel. There was this specific tactile quality to a trip to the library. And if I fast forward today, I live in downtown Toronto. Fort York is my neighborhood library branch. And when I really want to buckle down and do some work without any distractions, that's where I go. Sometimes I pick up physical books there that I've requested from another branch, but mostly I just like the space. There's lots of windows, and of course it's quiet. I'm almost invariably the oldest person there. It's full of students, new parents, freelancers typing away on laptops, folks using the banks of computers who don't have one of their own. And everywhere there are these portable bits of furniture like little footstools and desks that you can move around, and power sockets and USB ports everywhere. And the assumption clearly being that people will be using the space digitally, that it is primarily even a portal to the digital world. But the assumption is also that people will want to be there physically. Some of that is because people want to read physical books, or they want a place out of the cold, or they feel like leafing through magazines. But there's more to it, I think, than that. It's about returning to a physical place of comfort, of contemplation, about a neighborhood center for people from all different walks of life in a way that, at least in Toronto, feels increasingly rare. It really feels like a physical hub. But of course, all that was in the before time. Libraries were closed for a long time in Toronto due to COVID. Heather and I talked a little bit about what the Nelson Library did in order to kind of keep connection and keep library services going as much as possible during the shutdown in the early days. In Toronto, libraries are open now, but altered. Books are quarantined after being returned. Newspapers and magazines are no longer out. Desks are spaced far apart. I haven't gone because I don't need to, but at least the library, the physical library, is there for those who do. And so I've been reflecting on all this because I want to talk about what the library means in an age of digital abundance, though it is not digitally abundant for everyone, which I'll get to later. Beyond the obvious fact that there are resources and information that you can access through the library that you can't get by Googling, what is the core role for the library? Because if COVID's taught us anything, it's that A, the internet is an astonishing resource for connecting, learning, and working, that it provides us with what the designer Bill Buxton calls a social prosthetic, but also that B, the physical matters, right? We've all felt that so deeply during this pandemic. The physical space matters to those who are not digitally connected. It matters to those who are insufficiently digitally connected, who relied on the library or on nursing a coffee at Tim Hortons for Wi-Fi. Beyond that, though, it matters to us as humans. Look at us this evening. We feel simultaneously grateful that we have the tools to connect, but also the loss of not being physically together. As a social prosthetic, this group video meet lets us approximate the feeling of event, of togetherness, of being at the same place at the same time, if only on a screen. So in a hopefully post-pandemic future, what is the role for the library as digital space in the cloud and as physical space in our community? So to talk about that, I want to sketch out the informational environment we find ourselves in now and where we're likely to be heading in the next 2 to 5 years. But to start talking about the future of information, I'm going to jump back 700 years to the University of Bologna, which is the oldest continuing existing library in Europe, though not in the world. That honor belongs to a university in Fez, Morocco. But there's a very famous image that I've seen of the University of Bologna and of a prof standing at the front of a lecture hall lecturing to the students. And the lecture format came about because in the olden days, the professor would basically just read aloud from the book and the students would write down what he was saying. And they did this because books were this incredibly valuable and scarce thing, right? They were made out of parchment, which is animal skin. A single large book might take a small herd of cows or a flock of sheep. Think of the resource intensity of a single book. So in that old information ecosystem, information was scarce, tightly curated, hierarchical, and very stable. Compare that to today, where information is highly dynamic, even provisional, not as authoritative, bottom-up, and ubiquitous. Think of how quickly this has changed. Wikipedia launched in 2001. Do you remember how you reacted when you first heard that there was an online encyclopedia anyone could edit? Ah! And now, while far from being perfect, obviously, it's a fairly reliable starting point in researching a topic. YouTube launched in 2005. As of last year, 500 hours of video is uploaded to YouTube every minute, 500 hours. That's a lot of cat videos. If you're old enough to remember when an encyclopedia was a very expensive purchase and video meant consulting the TV guide for what was on a given day, that is an astonishing change in itself. When we think about access to digital information, we probably think along those lines. We think about how much video, audio, and text are available to us online. All those blogs, online newspapers, social media feeds, podcasts, and cat videos. But that's really thinking about information using the old model of books and films, just transferred over to a digital model of delivery. Instead, if we think more broadly about information as data, we start to see that it goes much further than that. The data we all generate is the wellspring, the raw material of a lot of useful information, as well as a lot of potentially harmful information. You think about the digital breadcrumbs you leave behind in a typical day if you, say, have a smartphone, an internet connection, and subscribe to a couple of digital services. You wake up, choose some music on Spotify, choices are logged to serve you similar artists next time. You visit some news websites and they use what you and many other people click on to determine what stories are hot and should move to a prominent part of the website, and also what should be pushed out to social media where other people see them. Your choices of what to read are actively shaping what other readers discover to read. You get in your car and enter your destination. If you're using Google's navigation system, it anonymously logs how quickly you're traveling, so it has a better sense of where the traffic jams are. This is Google's live traffic feature. It's using what it knows about how quickly cars are moving through Nelson to constantly update traffic information. Your driving behavior is informing what other drivers see on their live maps, and therefore informing the route they drive. Even if you don't need to use GPS, like you're on your way to work, your phone knows you're going to work because location awareness means it's logged that you travel to and from the same place on a regular schedule, like during office hours, Monday through Friday. I think about my own day working at home these days. The word processing and email programs I use suggests words and phrases based on my and others' past writing. And in the evening, Netflix recommends movies based on what I've watched in the past and similarity to others' viewing patterns. It'll even change the image on the digital cover page, depending on how it thinks I should be targeted, and on and on. As we go about our daily lives, just using the internet means our lives, behaviors, tastes, and preferences are being gathered and used to customize our experiences of the world around us. And this is by turns delightful or creepy, depending on who we are and whether that targeting feels helpful or intrusive, as anyone who's ever been hounded around the internet by ads for a product they once searched for in a moment of weakness can attest to. There is now a kind of feedback loop between ourselves and the informational environment that we inhabit, not just between us and our technologies, but among our technologies and other humans. The choices you and other people make shape what information you have access to. We can imagine a very rudimentary way this might have happened when the Nelson Library opened in 1920. Tracy's great-grandfather might have been the librarian and noticed that my great-grandfather liked to sign out Zane Grey Westerns, say, and so recommended other Westerns. By the same token, my great-grandfather may have discovered Jack London, and noticing this, Tracy's ancestor librarian may have recommended that to other people. But this would have been informal and largely accidental, rather than a constitutive feature of how we discover. It's constitutive in large part because it's automated, a point I'll return to later. And we're not really consciously trying to shape our or other people's informational environments. We're just trying to watch something on Netflix, navigate to the store, and so on. And we do need a means to filter the aptly termed fire hose of content. But we're also doing another type of data generation. We also choose to contribute a lot more subjective data that's more actively opt-in. This is a large part of what my research for my book was about, why we choose to self-track and push data about ourselves into the environment. So people sharing photos on Instagram or TikTok or Facebook, documenting something you saw and posting it to Twitter with a hashtag, sharing your running routes on Strava. You, I, and everyone else doing this are essentially creating a corpus of data and annotating the physical world around us digitally. What else is it when I take a picture of cherry blossoms in my neighborhood park, post it and label it hashtag Trinity Bellwoods, hashtag cherry blossoms? Of course, while we have a lot of this data, we don't always know what to make of it, right? We don't always know if it's telling us what we think it's telling us. Translating data into information is an imperfect process. I came across an amusing example of this just a few days ago on Twitter. I noticed that the phrase, "Thanks, Doug," was briefly listed as a trending topic on Twitter in Canada. And of course, being an Ontarian, I immediately thought something must have happened with Ontario Premier Doug Ford. So I looked into it, and I soon realized it was actually just a lot of random individual people thanking a guy named Doug in their lives or something. Well, there are a lot of people named Doug in Canada, I guess. So there you go, imperfect science. So we have this feedback loop between our interests and patterns of behavior digitally and the informational environment that we inhabit. We feed data into the infosphere, and that shapes, with the occasional glitch, what information we have access to and what information others have access to. Of course, that's the default. I can still have the independent idea to research and read something from the incredible trove of information available online, but the default is increasingly the norm, especially as the amount of information increases. These feedback loops in themselves are profound changes, but the reason this data explosion is both so powerful and potentially scary is because of FANGs. FANG, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Google. So it's not just that the data is out there and that there are insights that we can glean from the data and that it shapes the information we have access to. It's that the data is being brought together in these powerful global tech company hubs. Look how far the reach and range of these companies has extended. Facebook began obviously as a social networking site. It now owns Instagram, WhatsApp, its own messenger service. It owns a virtual reality company and is apparently in the midst of developing augmented reality glasses. Google began, of course, as a search engine. Now it has software suites that power a huge number of businesses, individuals, and educational institutions. It has its own phone, and it runs the mobile platform most of the world's 3.5 billion smartphone users run. They have hardware companies like Nest, smart speaker systems, and are leaders in AI. Remember the quaint old days when Amazon was an online bookstore? Now they own internet-enabled home security company Ring, the Whole Foods grocery store chain. They account for 40% of all online sales. The next closest is Walmart at 5% per MSNBC. Even if you don't use Amazon directly, giants like Netflix, the BBC, and Facebook rely on Amazon's cloud computing services. So why are these very smart companies with deep pockets and brainy researchers spreading their tentacles everywhere, into hardware, into software, into cloud computing services, into grocery stores? Because digital data and the insights you can produce from it are increasingly everywhere. And that's because as we go forward, we're starting to see more computational power embedded in the world around us. Devices, smart objects, and sensors that are connected to the internet will be the norm. And so this could be anything from the smart thermostat you can control with an app, so the temperature is right when you come home, to the city bus that tells you in real time how close it is, so you can plan your route, to your smart speakers that you can ask to play music. And the general term we use for this, of course, is the Internet of Things. And this is the promise of smart cities that we hear so much about, that once you can instrument the world around you, you can use the data for insights and responsive management of, for example, public transit or the electrical grid. At the micro level, this is the promise of smart homes, that just as you might now use a smart thermostat to regulate the temperature in your homes more responsibly, you might have next-gen features that automatically raise and lower the blinds depending on where the sun is and whether it's winter or summer. Ring Home Security, owned by Amazon, recently announced a drone that you provide a sort of map to, and it can fly around patrolling around your house at regular intervals or in response to noises. It has a video camera so you can watch it live wherever you are, which would mean I would be staring at video of my cat alternately sleeping or scratching the furniture. If some of these Internet of Things innovations seem of dubious utility, they still point to the future, which is a world where there is effectively a digital layer braiding through our physical environment. And the last piece of this puzzle in the new informational environment is artificial intelligence, and specifically an approach to AI called machine learning. The reason why the AI revolution is so powerful, and we certainly keep hearing about it a lot, is because at the same time as we're pumping out this enormous amount of data due to the digitization of our world, we've made huge advances in machine learning that specifically rely on access to enormous amounts of data. So that is a real 1-2 punch. So we have a world where decisions are increasingly automated by machine learning, and where we produce the data that drives and refines how machine learning works. So let me take a little diversion to dig into this, because it's probably the leading debate now in the politics of technology, and something we've covered quite a lot on my show Spark. So in the basic sense of automation, we've long had programs that replace what human intelligence used to do, like doing payroll, for example. And classically, artificial intelligence works by programmers listing an explicit set of rules. An algorithm in this sense is a set of rules to produce a desired outcome, how to make a great martini or a batch of chocolate chip cookies, for example. But machine learning algorithms are different. We think of them as being trained on data sets. So to use an example, you could teach a system to recognize cats. You could say, what are the features of cats? Cats have tails, fur, forelegs, pointy ears, except that there are always going to be exceptions to that. Scottish fold cats have bent over ears, curled up sleeping cats where you can't see any legs, hairless cats. We humans do some kind of gestalty whatchamacallit such that we recognize cats in the absence of a set of rules, so easily that we don't even call it intelligence. With the machine learning approach, though, you have a giant data set of images of cats, and you reinforce when the system gets the answer right until it has a high accuracy rate. Of course, I'm wildly oversimplifying here. So where we're seeing the powerful growth in applications of machine learning is in pattern recognition, looking for patterns and correlations in enormous data sets and finding non-obvious things a human wouldn't see, because humans can't look through hundreds of thousands of data points and find correlations. Human intelligence works by making inferences, assuming causation, and drawing conclusions based on access to limited amounts of data. Machine learning operates by making correlations based on large amounts of data. They don't infer, they make statistical assessments based on probability. So they have a natural home in fields where risk, probability, pattern recognition, and correlations are factors. For example, in insurance, in banking, in legal research, and in medical diagnostics. Now, there are all kinds of ways these machine learning systems can get this stuff wrong, wildly wrong in some cases. A classic cautionary example that just came up on my show on Sunday, actually, but comes up pretty much all the time now when people talk about how machine learning gets things wrong, comes to us from Amazon. They used a machine learning program to try to find new engineers. So they trained the program on data about the people who successfully worked for the company in the past, and then they unleashed the AI to look for online CVs and resumes, millions and millions of them, that matched the kinds of attributes they were looking for. But because Amazon has a history of hiring male engineers, the machine learning program not only downrated females, but downrated anything in the resumes that might be associated with females, like if a potential candidate played field hockey instead of football. So it does go wrong, as powerful as these tools are. Machine learning is also being used in more controversial areas that have real impacts on people's lives: mortgage rates, credit ratings, prison sentencing in the US, predicting success or failure in education, all using historical data to attempt to predict future risk and human behavior, looking for patterns and correlations in the same way you might look for patterns images of cats all had in common. To make those predictions accurately requires training data. And who's supplying the training data? We are. For instance, if you have millions of people all over the world talking to Siri on their phone or Google Assistant on their smart speaker, you also have a huge amount of data, speech, that you can use to train Siri or Google Assistant and make sure it gives better results. And the more we move into a world that's digitized, the more data we produce. So when we think about how powerful companies like Google can get, it's because of this data plus machine learning. So in the smart speaker world, it's not really an option for Google to say, nah, we don't really want to be in the business of selling smart speakers, because that way they cut themselves out of all that access to speech data. The thing is, the same way that Amazon's machine learning program could get tripped up by historical data of decisions made by hiring managers in the past, the data we generate now will shape the machine learning of the future. What you search for, what you click on, is all potentially training data. And so what we have is a kind of automation of our information system. We already automate part of our access to information every time we do a Google search. The algorithm surfaces some information first. Social media algorithms determine what you see in your feed, surfacing content that others have engaged with or that people you engage with are interested in. While the idea obviously is to connect you with the things that are important to you, it does shut you off from other perspectives. Further, increasingly data-driven algorithms are automating part of what we put out into the world. As I mentioned, as I wrote this talk in a Google Doc, Google's algorithm suggested words and phrases that would complete my sentence. Like right after I typed the words and, it suggested phrases, which suggests that apparently I just write in cliches. Would I have picked the word phrases on my own? I honestly don't know, but I just accepted the prompt. And that automation will increase, right? Automatically recognizing faces to organize images. Siri, as others have pointed out, this is not my idea, will give you the answer to your query rather than calling up a list of website options that will allow you to pick and make up your own mind. So to sum up the changes we're seeing now that will stretch out over the next few years, we have these two drivers. We're automating much of our informational environment, and we're also automating ever larger amounts of what was traditionally the purview of human judgment or taste. It's being done partly just to wrangle the extraordinary amount of information there is, but also because it can be done quickly. Humans don't have a very good track record at making fair decisions or at offering unbiased access to information. History is full of discriminatory decision-making and of silencing voices. This is, after all, why we lauded the explosion of blogging in the early part of this century, because it opened up the informational world to new perspectives. But automating some of these processes is not without its challenges. There are lots of ways we might critique and question all that's going on in this data-rich information ecosystem I've sketched out. The fact that using historical data to train systems ends up perpetuating historical bias, as for example with the Amazon case, or that the digital data layer we have created has produced globe-spanning economic titans, our FANGs, which may colonize all possible competition, or even threaten the full functioning of democracy, as we saw in the 2016 US election. Or we might complain that all the data we're churning out can be used to threaten our privacy or end up denying us opportunity if we find ourselves in the digital pile of resumes that didn't get picked for an interview. But in the context of this evening and the 100th anniversary of the Nelson Library, we might also want to think about what machine learning and more broadly, the overall automation of this informational environment means in terms of knowledge, learning, and community. The algorithmic shaping of information you see or don't see is a black box, so you don't know what you don't know. You don't know if an algorithm is not flagging you for a job interview. Former Spark guest Chris Gilliard used a great example of this, which was the revelation some years ago that Facebook was inadvertently allowing advertisers to target housing ads to users who were likely white. His point being, if someone has a sign saying whites only, at least you know what you're dealing with. But if you don't see an ad, how do you know that? Increasingly, it's difficult to trust what you see and hear and read because of the automation of information at global scale. You have things like the deliberate misinformation posted on websites during the 2016 election campaign in the US, not because of political partisanship, but just because outrage fuels clicks and that generates revenue from automated ads. Automated bots attempt to sway public opinion. And we're now seeing this spread into audio and video with so-called deep fakes, an application of machine learning where it can look like a person is doing or saying something they're not. So if we had a problem with fake news, imagine the scary future of that. And of course, algorithms shape the news and information you receive. If you want to see that in action, ask a friend who lives in a different area, who has a different personality from you, to do a Google search for a term at the same time as you do. And you'll see how your world is being shaped differently from other people's in an informational sense. So I think when you look back at all of these things, you can see that in a way we're kind of in the midst of an epistemic crisis, a crisis where we literally don't live in the same informational environment, where we increasingly do not even have a shared idea of truth, where people deny the climate crisis even while the American West burns and smoke makes its way all the way to Nelson, disrespecting all borders, where QAnon conspiracy theories run wild, and where they may have a real measurable effect on the outcome of the US election. And if you think about how different this is from that world that I talked about at the beginning, the world of Wikipedia and YouTube and the promise of the internet and how exciting it all was, that this was going to open up all kinds of information for all of us, when in fact we see in some ways our informational environment being closed down more than ever. A lot of this can of course be laid at the feet of social media, where mis and disinformation has been weaponized. Moves to contain it, from limiting the number of people you can share WhatsApp messages with, to taking down fake news sites have been tried. And while these advances in machine learning that I've been talking about are really amazing, detecting and shutting down disinformation is not a process that's been easily amenable to automating. And so we find ourselves in this consistent problem of trying to find and shut down so-called fake news and disinformation, all the while finding it very difficult to do, especially considering the global scale of these platforms. And so then I bring us back to my conclusion, which is the library in this world. It's a very chaotic informational world, right? I think we've all felt that the last little while. As much as we try and keep on top of information, it's a huge challenge. How can libraries lead in the context of this exciting, but frankly chaotic informational environment? Well, I think they can not only exercise the role they always have done in providing free and open access to good information, I believe they can model and lead what a future of collaborative, democratic information might look like. Excuse me. First, in helping address digital inequality. Surely nothing has made us as aware of the role of libraries in addressing digital access as the early weeks of the pandemic, when libraries were closed and coffee shops were closed or only serving takeout. Access to the internet was impeded or cut off from marginalized communities, even access to phone chargers. This at a time when access to high quality, up-to-date health information was absolutely crucial. So there's the financial sense in which some people don't have digital access, but then of course there's also just the technical, logistical aspect of getting broadband everywhere, getting access to good, stable internet connections everywhere is a vital, important part of what libraries can push for at the policy level. Second, I think we can think of the role of libraries as hubs of credibility, as they always have been, but I think as they need to be and are rising to the challenge to be now in this, as I say, chaotic informational environment, in helping people find good information. Libraries can and do play a lead role in media literacy. How much more crucial is that going to be in the midst of this epistemic crisis I've been describing? That old era of the University of Bologna I started off with, where information is tightly controlled and rarely changing and very hierarchical, is over. And by my lights anyway, good riddance. We're in this highly dynamic period. Now more than ever, we need libraries and librarians who can help us not just find information, but help us with this meta level of understanding, right? Of finding information about this informational environment that we find ourselves in. Third, I think we might think about the role of libraries as innovative leaders in using the new sources of data and information in exciting democratic ways. We already see libraries embrace the potential of this, for example, in the way they created 3D printing labs in library spaces. This is a new use of data and information, after all, to produce physical goods remotely. What are the new ways that libraries might engage with new media, like augmented reality? Can libraries, together with citizens, help create our augmented reality worlds? Can it be a project of public-spirited, democratic world building, and not just what the manufacturers of, say, Pokemon Go think it ought to be? Or can we imagine the library's role in machine learning, in thinking about machine learning for public-spirited projects, for bringing the community, for bringing citizens on board to try and build those machine learning applications together? And I think ultimately the reality is we need our libraries to be cultural hubs, informational hubs, and a kind of a hearth. So fourth, by continuing to model the kind of leadership that our institutions should strive to emulate, all of our institutions, a model of how to protect people's privacy in the digital world, a model for democratic and fair access to information in the digital world, and access to the digital tools to help us get that information. The library can lead in helping us articulate an ethics of data and information. Because the reality is the kinds of tools that the explosion of data make possible are actually powerful and potentially very important and very valuable. Just on Sunday on my show Spark, I talked to computer scientist Rajeda Bebe about her work using machine learning algorithms for social justice and for access to opportunities. So too, the things internet technology makes possible, crowdsourcing solutions to some of our most pressing problems, building more responsive, environmentally sustainable communities using smart city technology. Dare I say, using social media platforms to actually connect people rather than divide people. These data-driven applications and solutions need to be powered by a strong investment in the public good, by institutions that have public trust, guided by expertise in information and in protecting privacy. And if that isn't a description of the public library, I don't know what is. And so finally, we turn to the role of the physical space of the library. I think just as the digital space of the library, our home in the cloud, can serve as a kind of informational commons, we can think of the physical space of the library as a kind of commons for bringing together community, especially in the context of political divisions and filter bubbles, especially when we have a crisis of isolation and chronic loneliness in our communities. And that's what I really look to for the library, is that sense of the library as a hub, a connecting point, a sense of home and hearth, and a bringing together of diverse points of view in a physical space, in a digital space, and in the space of our imagination going forward. No one knows what Nelson will be like or what our information technologies will bring us by the time the Nelson Library celebrates its 200th anniversary. But I know it will continue to lead, to inform, and to connect. Thank you very much.